This podcast is sponsored by PAX. Whether on water, on land or in the air, PAX bags are both versatile and flexible backpacks that are perfectly suitable for your requirements in the most demanding of environments. PAX bags are highly regarded due to their exceptional performance in pre-hospital and in critical care environments. Renowned for their durability, they endure harsh conditions while providing rapid and reliable access to essential kit. So their well-organised compartments and customisable configurations enhance efficiency in high-stress situations. PAX bags are designed with infection control in mind and are easy to clean and disinfect. Their highly visible colours and reflective strips add quick identification and adherence to quality standards, assuring reliability. The versatility of PAX bags caters to a diverse EMS providers, but also delivers vital equipment and durability and ease of use for pre-hospital critical care services globally. I've used PAX bags in a number of critical care situations and they're absolutely excellent. Please see the show notes for further details.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast with me, Carl Betts. In this episode, we're chatting with Alex Mair. Alex qualified as a paramedic in 2022, following her study in her home country of Australia. She's the host and owner of a very good podcast show called the Student Paramedic Podcast that's an excellent resource for anyone engaged within paramedicine and pre-hospital care. Alex began her qualified career as a paramedic in a new country to her with differing working practices at the start of a very busy and very grim winter. In this podcast, I'm keen to find out more about Alex, her decisions to come to the UK as a newly qualified paramedic, and all the experiences linked to this, to offer you a flavour of the challenges young, newly qualified colleagues face when relocating both from a personal and a professional point of view, as well as discussing a bit of her podcasting history and how this journey has helped her in her paramedic life so far. So, welcome, Alex.
Thanks so much for having me, Carl. This is great. Got tea, we've got pastries. This is amazing.
This is the first time I've done this face to face, and I tell you what can't go wrong if we've got a pile full of pastries and a pot of tea with a tea cosy, and you didn't know what a tea cosy was until this morning, did you?
Yeah, I'm learning lots of new things, not even just in terms of the paramedic world, but everything outside of paramedic world and into UK life.
So for people who don't know what a tea cosy is, it's the most important thing when you're making tea is that you've got to have something to keep the teapot warm. So it's like a hat for a teapot. So there we go.
Yeah, we definitely don't need that in Australia.
No. Well, in this summer that is currently very cold in the UK, we absolutely do.
Absolutely.
So we're going. So thanks for coming on the podcast. It's great to speak to you, and it's great to speak to you because this is role reversals this now, Alex, because I was fortunate to be interviewed by you when you first came to the UK for your podcast. And it's really nice that we're doing it the opposite way around now to find a little bit about you. So thanks very much for giving up your time. But I think the most pertinent thing to start off with is just give yourself a bit of an introduction. Let's find out a little bit about Alex Mair.
Oh, there's not much to know, really. Yeah, I mean, from a university perspective, I studied nursing and paramedicine. I graduated at the end of 2021, and then I started my graduate journey into nursing. I started in the A&E department at a very busy A&E department in Brisbane, and then decided to move to the UK. So I gave up that part of my nursing at that particular point in my life and decided that I'll move to the UK. So I've been working here now for pretty much 2 years. It's been a whirlwind of ups and downs and exciting times. And you know, as you mentioned, I started the Student Paramedic Podcast when I was at university, which has grown into its own little beast. It's got fantastic sort of episodes based on interviewing people from all around the world. It was something that I started. Didn't know that it would get as big as it is, but it's fantastic and I really enjoy it. But other than that, there's really not much else to really tell, to be fair.
Cool. That's a lovely introduction. So you've been qualified for nearly 2 years now, and you've come to the UK as a newly qualified paramedic. So green as grass, straight out of university. I'm just intrigued to know, you talked about ups and downs, just how is it going in general? How have you found the last 2 years?
Oh, that's a big loaded question. Yeah, the past 2 years have been incredible. It's been a learning experience, that's for sure, from a personal perspective and a professional side of things as well. Yeah, it's going really great at the moment. I can't complain at all, and it's been a fantastic experience. I've no regrets whatsoever.
And what was the key sort of defining decision point that made you want to start as a newly qualified paramedic? You know, to build that experience base, to come to the UK, and to give up your nursing, which is sort of a big deal in its own right. To come to the UK, what was the main instigator for it?
Yeah, I mean, I was always very open to applying to all different services, all different ambulance services in Australia. And I did put my hat in the ring for a particular recruitment drive that was happening for the UK. So I wasn't quite sure on what I wanted yet. So I applied for everything. I went through countless interviews and that whole application process. And I got offered this job in the UK, but at that point as well, I was doing my nursing, and so it was a bit of a tough decision. I didn't know what to do. It was a very competitive nursing role that I'd applied for, and I'd got, luckily. So it was a really challenging decision to make. I think in the end, after COVID, you know, the whole world shut down. It was a challenging time for a lot of people. And I think I realised at that point that, you know, there's an opportunity to go work in another country, get paid to do something I love, get to travel, and gain some experience doing that. So in the end, that was mainly the main point of my decision in terms of, you know, trying something new and getting to take on this opportunity that I probably wouldn't get to do again.
That's a really interesting thing, that there's so many opportunities now for newly qualified paramedics out there that actually, where do you start? Whereas years ago, you used to start in your local ambulance service. That was what you did. And it's really interesting now that you've got all these choices and all these decisions to make so early on in your career. And actually, you know, yours was a massive decision because you've come thousands and thousands of miles from your support mechanisms to, you know, working in a system that's struggling, you know, with all the problems associated with that. As well as settling into a new way of life, isn't it? And a new culture. And when you came over here, there's not much light in terms of daylight because you arrived just before winter, didn't you? So it was pretty grim. And I remember the winter was a pretty grim winter. So with that, in the last couple of years, what's been the biggest sort of challenge that you've faced, both in a clinical setting? Not necessarily just about specific instance, but the general sort of clinical work over in the UK, but also from a holistic approach. What's been the sort of biggest challenges, and sort of have they conflicted with each other?
I think clinically it was to be fair, the whole experience was a bit of a culture shock initially. You know, we had a week to settle in and then start straight on an induction. And then, you know, after 3 weeks of induction, we were put out on the road with another paramedic for a couple of weeks, and then, you know, off we went. We were on our own. And over here, it's very different, I think, to Australia. So from a clinical setting, the vast differences were something that I wasn't used to. So over here, there is completely different ways of working, from a sense of, in Australia, you know, most services are dual paramedic ambulance services. Over here, there's obviously different roles. We have technicians, we have ambulance support staff. There's all different titles for those different roles, but basically you're put on with someone that may not be a registered clinician with the HCPC. So from being a brand new qualified paramedic from a different country, working with someone who isn't necessarily a registered clinician was a bit daunting at first. So that was a main challenge initially. It's something that I've come to love, and I love working with people from all different sort of experiences in the roles that we do. And then equally, there was also a major change in working that over here in the UK, obviously people that are listening from the UK know, but in Australia, a lot of people don't know this, that, you know, there's all different referral pathways. There's a bit more of an emphasis on keeping people at home and having to really develop your clinical skills, your assessment, having the ability to recognise risk and safety netting people appropriately was very different, and having to really figure out, you know, can I keep this person at home safely by calling a GP, or am I doing the right thing? Are we, making sure they've got the right treatment plan? That was all very different and quite daunting initially, but something that I've really come to love. And I think it's something that really needs to grow in Australia. But that was the main differences. Obviously, from a holistic sort of perspective, just getting used to the UK was different. Had to get used to the accent. And I don't mean that lightly. I remember my first shift, and I remember I was third manning, and I remember looking at the clinician and that I was working with, and I just remember being like, what on earth are they saying? Like, I really struggled. I really had to concentrate. And I only recognize that now because 2 years later I can understand what people say without having to really concentrate. But yeah, I know that's a funny sort of side of it. But yeah, it's the small things like that, including everything from where do you get your groceries to how do you set up your rent to everything. It was very, very challenging initially.
Yeah, and I suppose at the time that the challenges can be sort of all-consuming, really. But then when you reflect on them sort of 2 years in, actually some of the most pertinent learning of your sort of personal development as well as professional development can come when times are tough. And I suppose it's how you sort of manage them times, isn't it? And when you're talking about sort of the simple things like the accents and things like that, in the areas where we are, there's different accents within the city, there's different accents within different towns, there's different accents within different streets sometimes. And actually when you're really trying to get to grips with a patient's history to make sure that you can safety net them, it's really important that you've fully understood what's going on. And actually, if you're struggling to understand the accent, it's a real barrier that you're not going to learn overnight, are you? So it's really interesting that I remember when I first qualified that I looked for my mentor on the ambulance one day. There was one particular job that, I was going to be quite busy on it. And I remember being next to the patient, and I looked to where my mentor would always stand when we were on the ambulance, and he would always stand to my left-hand side. And he wasn't there. And I was like, all right, this is real now. I'm the one here doing this, and I've got to get on with it. And it's them sort of key points that you sort of think, actually, yeah, I am doing this. And then when you get really comfortable with your safety net, and you get really comfortable with being able to sort of leave patients at home, you really feel proud of your clinical ability and clinical skill, because you think, I'm on point with this. I really am. I know where I'm going with this. And it's a really hard thing to learn initially, and a really hard thing to be comfortable with, because effectively the decision is on you. You can make telephone calls to sort of, safety net and bounce these ideas, but at the end of the day, you're the one making the decision. And for a young person who's new to a country, new to a role, new to getting established, it's just another thing that is a new thing you've got to learn.
Absolutely. And like to sidetrack from that as well, I guess I remember when people would say, oh, like as an NQP or a newly qualified paramedic, they take them to hospital all the time, sort of thing. And I think, it takes that time to develop that confidence and that ability to leave people at home. And I think it literally just comes with time and practice, and it's been a massive learning curve. Yeah.
And also not just the practice, I think it's the support mechanisms as well, about having sort of people around you trust, who you can feed them jobs back to and say, what do you reckon? Would you have done the same thing? Because, if you don't have them discussions, it just becomes you in isolation, feeling like you're making decisions all the time. Whereas actually, they're good to question these decisions when you've got an inkling of sort of, did I do the right thing there? I'm not quite sure. And you discuss it, and people say, that's a really sound plan. That's how you build your confidence, isn't it? Over time. Because I remember, I felt like a rabbit in the headlights for the first, I don't know, even for like the first year. You sort of think, I'm not really sure exactly what I'm doing here. You do know what you're doing. It's just a confidence thing. But do you think the UK pre-hospital care, the balance between support and autonomy, is healthy for NQPs? Because, this is where we're getting at, is that you get onto this role and you've just got to get on with it. And there is support there. But I'm trying to work out, do you think there's enough support there?
That's a great question. It's a very loaded question. This could be a whole podcast in and of its own, I think. I think when I started my NQP period, I would have liked a little bit more support. Maybe that's just because I was, one of quite a few people that were from a different country trying to really figure out what's going on. I think looking back, now that once this podcast comes out, I won't be in my newly qualified period anymore. I think looking back, there's definitely a need for a bit more support. Having people that are sort of delegated mentors that you can go to and talk to and have a bit more formal opportunity to debrief jobs and have a sort of a period where you can really facilitate and consolidate your learning. I think that would be very beneficial, whether that's sort of a one-to-one thing with, your team leaders or with mentors or something that's a bit more formal rather than sporadic sort of days to talk to people or to engage in other learning. I think that would be very beneficial. I think it's individual though. So what I would like versus what you'd like, Carl, as an NQP would be completely different. And I think that's just based on, you as an individual, what you do to learn, and what kind of support you need clinically or personally as well. So I think it's similar to that university aspect of being adult learning. You really need to sort of advocate for yourself. And we had these conversations when we first started as a group of Australians. And I remember saying to some people that, if you need more third medding shifts, chat to, whoever you need to get that sorted, or, we just need, or, reach out as a group, we can organise things and things like that. Having sort of that adult learning aspect to it and just really advocating for yourself, realising that this is your NQP period. This is no one else's NQP period. Like, this is yours. And that could be in Australia too. If it's your graduate program, like it's yours, you need to get out of it what you need to get out of it. And everyone has been to different universities, had different clinical experience, different learning. So whatever you need to figure that out and advocate for yourself. So I think from that perspective, it's partially individual, but also I feel like there still is an onus on organisations to have a bit more of a structured approach. I can't speak for every organisation, but I think having a bit more of a structured approach might help in that sense, even if it's just a bit more formal. I think looking back though, there is an opportunity for support, and I used to struggle with the idea that you were on your own, you didn't have the opportunity to like bounce back, like you said, and ask someone if was that the right thing to do. But things like making a phone call as NQPs, you had over here in this particular organisation, you have to call for discharging people at scene, and I used to be quite freaked out to do that initially, but I've realised that those phone calls with a senior clinician was your way to provide get feedback on your assessment and your management plan for that patient. So you got immediate feedback on what you were doing with that patient. So I think as much as it was a tedious task for a lot of things, I learnt so much out of doing that religiously, because I learnt things that I'd never learnt before at university around keeping people safe at home, about particular sort of diagnoses or working impressions, and supporting patients in a way that wasn't just we're discharging them, they're going to call their GP. We're going to also implement so many things in their home to keep them safe at home. So there's that aspect as well. So I think support is a huge thing. But there's still, I think, a personal responsibility and an organisational responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's sort of such a really accurate account of things, in the fact that, one, it shows a huge maturity on your part in the fact that your self-reflective practices is, every time I make this phone call, I'm going to get some feedback on how I'm performing. And I think that just shows a maturity that's sort of beyond your age slightly, if I'm to be honest, and sort of is really healthy, because you take that as a real sort of positive. And in terms of what you're talking about it's an organisational responsibility. It absolutely is an organisational responsibility, but it's so pleasing to hear that we have our own personal responsibilities, because we're also in charge of our own clinical skill set and our professional skill set and our professional hat. And one thing that organisations, I think, as a general, need to do better is understanding people as people. Because if we don't understand people as people, you're not going to understand what these people need. And it's about, and that takes time, and that takes sort of, you've got to really sort of want to do that to foster it. And when you work in big organisations where there's lots of people, it's really easy for the quiet person to disappear under the radar, when in fact that is the person who needs potentially a lot more support, if they're not going to advocate for themselves because they're too shy or whatever. So yeah, it's really pleasing to hear that sort of bilateral thing is really important. But it's really pleasing to hear how mature you are around the fact that we've got to make these phone calls. It's for a positive reason. What am I going to get out of it? And I've never heard that spoken about before. And actually, I think if everybody saw it through that lens, everybody would benefit from it, not only the patients, but the clinicians as well. So that's really powerful. So moving on to then, that moves on to really nicely, actually, the next sort of piece of information I'd like to sort of chat through, really. What's the most profound piece of personal reflection you've had whilst working in the UK as a paramedic? I know that's a bit of a deep one.
That's tough. Clinically.
Clinically or personally, what's been, while you've been here in this journey, what's been the most profound thing that, you know, you've learned?
Clinically, the most profound thing I've learned is that, you know, it's a cliche, you're never going to know everything, absolutely, and you come across things every day, but I think I've realised that no matter what you're faced with, you'll just deal with it. And I used to be so stressed, I think initially for that first at least 10 to 12 months, going to jobs being like, you know, really getting myself into sort of a frenzy internally, figuring out what am I going to do, you know, how, you know, what happens if it's a really bad job or you know, what if I do something wrong sort of thing. I really freaked out about that for about 10 to 12 months. And I think I realised it eventually that, you know, to this point at 2 years in, I've dealt with every single job that I've had to go to, like whether it be good, bad, you know, fumbled my way through, whatever it is, I've always managed to come out of it. Otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here chatting to you, you know. So I realised that everything was just ABCs. Literally, if I didn't know where to start, everything was ABCs. It was the basics, which just sounds so cliche, because like every clinician I've spoken to on the Student Paramedic podcast has said, get your basics down pat, and it really does make a difference. Just having that understanding of everything's going to be okay, we'll figure it out. There's always going to be someone to call, some backup to help you, or you're just going to be able to deal with it in ABC wise, and that's all you can do. I think that really helped. And it took, like I said, that almost 12-month period, like you mentioned as well, just to get comfortable with that understanding. And now, even if I am driving to a job and I think that I'm not going to know exactly what to do on it, I've realised that 99% of the time the job isn't as what it says it is on the MDT or the Terrafix, and when you get there, it's going to be a completely different story, and you're gonna figure it out because you have to, and you will, and you're going to. So that's absolutely fine. So I think that was a nice realization. So I stress less now going to jobs. You know, obviously there's the every now and then where it says birth that I freak out, or you know, a child of some way, shape, or form. But you know, it's less you know, less jobs that I freak out now about going to.
And I think one of the things you've touched on there is the fact that the ambulance sector is very good. We just make do and mend, you know, because the scenarios that you find yourself in, you know, you've never got the perfect piece of equipment that you need. You've never got the perfect lighting. Invariably, it's probably raining. You know, all these things that sort of are desperate to work against us. We're just really good at just getting on with stuff. And it's really interesting when you're talking about for the first 10 months, you were sort of really, I suppose it's pre-instant anxiety, isn't it? Of the, what could I go to? And actually over time, I've reflected on this in my own practice, in the fact that over time, you're a newly qualified paramedic, and as your knowledge grows, because you're carrying on learning at quite a steep learning curve, at the same time, your experiential learning curve is also growing. And with experiential learning, every job you go to, you can take something from previous jobs and bring it to the next and bring it to the next and bring it to the next. So basically your armoury becomes massive of experience. If you're doing 6 jobs a day and you're working full time, it builds up. Then what happens if you're in sort of my situation now where you're not clinical as much? What you then have is you have this experiential curve where I now know what I could go to because I've been to an awful lot of incidents. But I've now got some skill fade. So now I've got the pre-incident anxiety because I know what I could go to. And actually, have I still got the skill set to be able to deal with it like I could a year and a half ago? And it's really interesting that you're at a point now where you're really comfortable in your skin. Your experiential learning is sort of still on point, and your knowledge base, you're getting really confident and comfortable with your knowledge. And that is a really, really happy place to be at because, like you say, it doesn't matter what you go to. You can confidently cobble your way through it. You can do what you need to do in not the best situation to get the outcome or the best outcome that you can. And I think that's quite a seminal moment in someone's sort of practice, really, because the penny just drops that, you know what, I'm good at this. I know what I'm doing, and it doesn't matter what you throw at me. We'll be able to deal with this. By hook or by crook, we'll be able to sort it out. And I think you want to reflect proudly on getting to that point because I think that's a key moment in your sort of clinical practice now, and also your mental well-being as well, that you've got there. It's amazing it takes 2 years, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I used to really be confused as to why this NQP period in the UK is 2 years, and majority of the programs in Australia were at least 6 to 12 months. And, I used to be like, by now I would be a qualified paramedic if I was in Australia, and I'd say things like that. But then internally I've realised that, wow, like now 2 years in, I just feel ready and comfortable and capable to sort of do what I need to do. It's massive. Like, it's that realization now. But if you asked me 12 months ago, I'd probably be like, I could be qualified now. What are you on about? Like, but it does take that 2 years time, I think. And
I think that's where it comes back to that individuality, isn't it? Everybody's different. So some people do need the 2 years. Some people need 8 months. Some people just need a year. And I suppose it depends what other life skills that you bring with you and what have you done in the past to help you sort of build this experiential learning and sort of confidence in your own skin, really, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So now that you've settled into life over here, because you've been here 2 years, you're talking about, you're comfortable in your practice, you're comfortable with working in the ambulance service. You're a person who likes to sort of have things on the go. Your podcast is a classic example of this. So sort of career moves moving forward then. What's on the horizon? Because there's loads of opportunities now. And I'm keen to know, where do you see yourself going?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do for breakfast tomorrow, let alone, no, I'm joking. There's pastries, I know. Oh, I'm excited for those. No, I mean, I'm the type of person that likes to have a lot of different, a lot of fingers in a lot of different pies and really try out a lot of different things to see what really, piques my interest. I think I'd like to really become a well-rounded paramedic first. And that includes trying lots of different things, as I said. So, I've been trying to volunteer at the university to do sessional work. I want to become a better mentor. I'm looking at different secondments and things like that within the organisation to sort of develop my skills outside of just being a clinical paramedic. Whatever that may look like now in the future, whether that be going down more a specialist paramedic route or in sort of different areas of paramedicine, I'm not too sure. But, I've spoken to people on the Student Paramedic podcast, such as Dr. Sandy McQuarrie, and I want to get into research as well. So I literally am the type of person that wants to do a bit of research, a bit of mentoring, a bit of academic side of things, obviously the clinical side of things. And, as we've spoken about, things like quality improvement, all sorts of different aspects of paramedicine, just to get a bit of a better idea about the bigger picture. and see where that takes me. So I'm not someone that's said that, I'm going to be a critical care paramedic by the time I'm, 27. I don't know what people do nowadays, but I'm very interested in keeping my options open and trying lots of different things and seeing where that takes me.
I'm very much similar to you in that way, in the fact that it's quite nice to know lots of bits and bobs about lots of different things, and actually that helps you become a sort of a more rounded paramedic, in the fact that if you do some work in the control centre, then you get to have a bit of an understanding of, well, why are these jobs coming to us in such a fashion? Why are they being coded like this? And it gives you that sort of holistic approach to the whole big picture then, doesn't it, of why we work the way we do. And I'm all for that. And I think a big part of moving forward, what the sector needs to do is mandate that people go around the organisation, even if it's just for sort of a day here, a day there, because then what you do is you break the silo barriers down, and you break these brick walls down between Department A and Department B, and that greater understanding about how things work is like really important, even just down to things like, like our fleet team. We break a lot of, as the ambulance sector as a whole, we break a lot of ambulances. Well, why do we break a lot of ambulances? And until people come out and see what we do to these things, then you're never really going to understand why we do it. And I think it's this whole joint learning thing, which, again, it comes down to this maturity thing, Alex, that you've got, is the fact that you're just sort of just aware of things, and you're aware of how things sort of feed into each other, which not everybody has. So I think that in the future, no matter what you do, whatever route you decide to go down, is probably going to stand you in good stead, just because of that interest factor that you have, that sort of genuine desire to find out, why is that like that, and why do we do this like this? So yeah, I think that's sort of really, really powerful. And when you talk about your fingers in lots of pies, that directly leads on to your podcast, because your podcast is a really sort of a really positive podcast that has just lots of super inspiring people on it, that if you're not a student and you just work in pre-hospital care, it's absolutely applicable to you. So I absolutely advocate that any of the listeners who want to sort of go and search it out, the Student Paramedic Podcast, yeah, absolute superb resource. And if you're a mentor and you've got students, direct them that way, because it is a super resource. But what made you want to commit to starting this? Because this is your podcast. This is fully yours. Started ground up on your own. How did that whole start? And what made you want to start? Is it that need to find out information? Is that where it stemmed from?
Yeah, I think at the time it was COVID. Everything locked down. Obviously, couldn't go into university for a lot of things. A lot of CPD events had been cancelled at that time as well. And coming from a dual degree background, there was lots of sort of subjects that we'd miss out on because of having to combine the 2 degrees together. So there was some things I missed out on, and paramedics love telling stories. I love telling, other paramedics and other people, what jobs they've been on, and, what they've seen and what they've done. And, that's, as a student, I feel like, when you're a first, second year student, you kind of idolize that sort of stuff. So I really miss that sort of storytelling and communicating with people. I just had this need to find out, why do paramedics have and I say paramedics, I do mean, the entire ambulance service as well. Like, obviously, when I studied, it was in Australia, so it was all paramedics, but obviously here it's not just paramedics. But why do ambulance staff have such a high turnover? 6 years is what I heard when I was a student. How do we maintain longevity? This can't be right. You spend 3-4 years studying and then only spend a few years in the job role. That seems absolutely crazy. So there was that aspect of it. There was the CPD aspect of it. I had so many questions, and I thought, I want to get them answered, but how do I make it so that other people can access that information? So it was basically just this curiosity and wanting to share that information with other people. And I was very lucky at that time to have people around me that had been in the podcasting world. And so, whilst you say, I built this from ground up by myself, I had a fantastic group of people around me that really did help in that sense. So I can't say it's all just me. And people have come along on the way to help out with the podcast and have gone away and done their own things, and so again can't say it's just been me throughout that period of time. But yeah, it's been fantastic, and it was just mainly that need for curiosity around particular parts of paramedicine, and it's continued to grow. And it's not just for students, really. I think I've tried to rebrand it, but then I thought, everyone's a bit of a student, so I've kind of kept it as it is for now. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, what a powerful message that is, that everyone's lifelong learning, isn't it? If you think you know everything in this game, something's going to really sort of come along and give you a short, sharp shock at some point. So yeah, what a lovely way to sort of think about that. It's sort of really interesting. And I'm intrigued to know, as like a byproduct of hosting and managing the podcast, specifically, how's it helped with your practice?
There's a lot of aspects, I think. I've got this ability to ask people lots of questions that would necessarily, or I think would initially appear quite sort of intimidating in a way. So, I don't mind looking like a bit of a fool asking maybe it's a simple question to some consultant, but just asking questions and not being afraid of doing that. Reaching out to people who do have, a CV that's, 6 pages long, but feeling comfortable just asking if they're happy to come on and have a chat, things like that. From a clinical side of things, I think, I've learned a lot through the podcast, through all the messages, things around, jadedness and like trying to prevent burnout. And look, I'm not saying I'm perfect. Everyone I think experiences those negative feelings sometimes as well. But, really trying to maintain a good attitude towards the job. Clinically, there's been, things learnt about, traumatic brain injuries. There's been all sorts of different topics all on the podcast that, interviewing people from around the world that are experts in that field have really provided sort of insights that I wouldn't have learnt at university, wouldn't have learnt in a textbook. And I think as a university student, you can get quite sort of bogged down in thinking that what you learn at university is pretty much everything you need to know. And you don't realise that there are so many people out there with so many, bigger insights into those different topics. So that's really helped from everything. I've learnt so much that I wouldn't have learnt from reading a textbook or being at university. So yeah, there's so much that could be a podcast in and of itself. But I think attitude, things around preventing sort of jadedness, burnout, looking after your own mental health, and sort of the clinical deep dives have been sort of the things that have really impacted me in a positive way.
One of the things that sort of listening to the podcast and also being a part of it with you, when you interviewed me, is when you talk about the silly questions that may be perceived to be silly by the person listening, they're not silly at all, because you've got an audience, and your audience is of a certain sort of group, and therefore you're trying to tailor your discussions around linking it to that. And sort of I think that's sort of really powerful in the fact that, if you don't talk to the level that the listeners are needing, then nobody's gonna listen to it. And I think one of the reasons why your podcast is so successful is because you absolutely do that. You make sure that the content is fit for your audience, and that's why it's so successful. And as I say, the podcast that I've listened to, I've always taken something away from it. And it's interesting that you talk around about the burnout side of things, that I know the last 2 years you've had sort of some real ups and downs, which, as everybody who comes into a new role may go through, but you've got the new role, you've got the new place to live, you've got the lack of family support next to you. And it's really interesting that you have that as something that's really important to keep on your radar. And I think that's going to keep you in good stead in the long run, because you're aware of it and it's on your radar. And I think it's really important what you're doing to bring that to the forefront for other people, because you have to appreciate, Alex, not everybody's as aware of you, as aware of you are, of your own self and your own sort of, and your own being. And I don't quite think you realise how important it is when people get to listen to other people talking about the things they've gone through and how they've dealt with it, and how, you know, it's become a positive at the end of it. So I think you should really sort of pat yourself on the back for doing that, because of the impact that you have into the sort of wider community. But just sort of starting to sort of wrap things up at the end of this, I'm really keen to hear. I always like people who I sort of chat to offer a golden nugget. That's what I call it. It's just that piece of information that if you were either taught it, that now you've been taught it, it's just there, or a golden nugget that you've learned that you think, you know what, I think this should be on people's radar. What would it be?
Ooh, that's great. Oh, I'm trying to think of which one to pick now. I think the biggest thing I've learned is to really treat people with respect. And I know that sounds really cliche, but if you really care about your patients, and you really want to do them a service, and you really want to treat them comprehensively and holistically, you'll end up feeling really fulfilled in the job. I think it's really easy to get jaded. We've all been there. We've all had those moments, I think. But I think by remembering that these people are calling on their worst days, or maybe what you don't perceive to be, you know, an emergency, but it is to them, or whatever it may be, you've got an opportunity to really help someone in that particular time, whether it be through health literacy and education, whether it be through keeping that person at home safely and organising them to have so much support, like, say, for example, where we are, hospital in the home, or like active care recovery and hospital beds and extra support and carers and things like that. You know, really taking that time to understand the patient and what they need, whether it be, say, you know, the homeless person that you're with that you really want to advocate for, and, you know, get them the basics, even if you're at hospital, just to get them like things like a shower, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, it might take a bit of extra time. It may not be what you've learned in a textbook or at university, but at the end of the day, it's all about people. It's all about dignity and respect, and you're going to have a much more fulfilling career if you do that.
What an amazing way to finish. That's so powerful. And I think when people are tired, and when people are a bit fed up because they've been laid off, and, you know, there's loads of things going on within the sector that sort of is really negative, sometimes you can really forget that. And it's sort of hearing it spoken like that should bring it to the forefront of people's minds that we're privileged to do the job we do, really privileged. And we're really privileged to be able to have such, you know, a vital role to play in a patient's care. And especially when you talk about the advocacy, you know, we might be the only person who can advocate for that person. And if you miss the opportunity, you've missed it. So that is so powerful. So I think that is the perfect place to wrap this up, really. But thanks very much for your time with us, Alex. I've been looking forward. We've been trying to do this for months.
A long time.
And I've been really looking forward to doing it. And it's been really nice to sit in the kitchen with a cup of tea and some cakes and do this on a real personal level. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Definitely. And
please do go and listen to the Student Paramedic podcast. There's a lot of really cool stuff on there. And thanks, Alex, for everything you're doing. You're a bright light for the newly qualified profession.
Appreciate that, Carl. Thanks for having me.
No worries.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.